Yes, attentive audience.
Yeah.
Quality, not the quantity.
So are we online already?
Yeah, we are online.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm really happy to have Yemeni guests here because you know that my heart lies in Yemen. So my name is Susanne Algren and I'm director of this Finnish Institute here in Beirut, and we are this week actually having too many, I would say, events, and that's why not so many people could come here. But anyhow, so we are also involved in that conference, big conference in Grand Plaza. We have a panel there tomorrow on Yemen. But tonight we have Yasmeen al-Eryani here, who is director of research in Sana Center for Strategic Studies, which is, I could say, it's the leading think tank in Yemen, and still works inside the country. And but she is also a PhD student of mine in Tampere University, and tonight she is going to talk about the Houthis and about their ideology.
Their evolving role.
Evolving role, okay. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting me, and for your interest in this timely topic. So I'll start today with, maybe we can go through these over the hour now. If we can scroll or...
Yeah, just let me know when you want to change the slide.
Okay, perfect.
So, yeah.
So I'll focus on their evolving role from a local group to a regional actor, which means that we will talk a little bit about who they are, their historical trajectory, without getting too much into history, and then also their evolving role, which is the main topic of the presentation today. And how the local is now shaping the regional, and maybe even one can say the global. And we can maybe discuss this together because I think it's an interesting concept, and it is connected to bigger shifts on the geopolitical landscape in the region, rising middle powers, and also the role of non-state actors that's becoming very evident in some of the interstate wars that we're seeing in the region. So historically, the Houthis, the word Houthi is the name of the surname of the family that comes from Saada, which is in the north of Yemen, and it's a Zaydi Hashemi family. It started actually already in the 80s. There was a lot of interest in some of the leading figures in the family to understand better the Iranian revolution and to learn from the religious scholars in Iran. So there have been some visits, for example, of Badaro Houthi and family members of Abdul Malik, who is the current leader of the Houthi group, to Qom and Mashhad and other places in Iran. So the connection with Iran actually dates back to almost as early as the Iranian revolution. In a certain moment, it changed into an armed insurgency or a rebel group that fought several wars with the government. We can talk a little bit about that in a moment. But it also had a political engagement at some point. So the Houthis established a political party. There was one member in the parliament in the 1990s. And they were also active in the 2011 uprising and in the national dialogue that followed. So this means that it's important to understand the Houthi in its multi-dimensional way as a militant group that had a certain historic trajectory which shaped the way it behaved, but also it shaped its ambition that we are seeing now in the region. And also a political group at some points, at least when it was convenient for it to be political and to engage in politics. And these were very short moments. It was not a very in-depth engagement in political life, civil political life, let's say. There were very important formative wars between 2004 and 2010 that the Houthis were facing the government at that time. And there were 6 rounds of these wars, and they were quite brutal, concluding with the last round between 2009 and 2010, where the Saudis also intervened militarily. And these wars provided the Houthis with a lot of experience in guerrilla warfare, and we see this in the way that they act today as well, and it gave them a lot of resilience to manage to overcome this and continue to fight even with all the losses that they were facing. In 2014, an important event happened, which was that they took over the capital, Sana'a. And this transformed the movement or the group in a fundamental way, because it became a militia group that suddenly had power over public institutions and government, and it could in some ways behave as a government, although without really the responsibility of governance or any regard to accountability or anything like that. So it could play on the 2 fronts of being a militia, not answerable to anyone, raising the flag of the battle above everything else, and also a group that utilizes public institutions to control the population and to gain more power and consolidate its power in the areas that it controls. There's also another important event, and I will show you in a little bit a timeline that shows these important events. We can talk about them in more detail, which was the Houthi-Saleh alliance. So I was saying earlier that the Sada wars were formative, and the Sada wars between 2004 and 2010 were between the Houthis and the former president, deceased president Ali Abdullah Saleh. So after the Houthis took over the capital, Sana'a, and shortly after that, the Saudi-led Arab coalition started its military campaign in Yemen. Ali Abdullah Saleh went into a pragmatic alliance with the Houthis that lasted for a couple of years and ended with his assassination by the group. Also something important happened in addition to this, which was the encroachment of the Houthis after they took over Sana'a into the south, which flared a civil war between the Houthis and the population in these areas that had no acceptance at all of the Houthis. And this civil war that was quite brutal, especially the Aden battle of 2015, which lasted for 4 months, it turned into an internationalized or regionalized and internationalized war with the intervention of the Saudi-led Arab coalition and also the involvement of the US and other powers. We can move to the timeline. So when I was putting this timeline together, I mean, there were so many important events and it was very packed, so I put it in 2 or 3 phases. The pre-2014 takeover of the capital, which saw some of the important moments. First, what I was explaining earlier, the early formative days of the 1980s and 1990s, and the influence of the Iranian Revolution, but also the expansion of Salafi groups within Sada, the area where the Houthis come from, and it's a traditionally Zaidi area. And the establishment of Dar al-Hadith in Dammaj in Sada in, I think, 1979, something like in the 80s. So it was at the same time that this tension was also starting to arise. In 1990, I think it was Ahmad al-Shami co-founded Hizb al-Haq with Badr Houthi and others. And in 1993, they managed to take a seat in the parliament, 1 seat. And so there was, at that point one can think that they were maybe thinking of going to political track and engaging in that in a normal way. But then in 1992, a new group was formed called the Shabab al-Mu'min, or the Believing Youth, which was mostly a revivalist Zaydi group focusing more on Zaydi culture, on protecting the culture, and it was trying to rally the youth in Sada around this cause. Hussein al-Houthi, who is the brother of the current Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of the Houthi movement, was groomed for this role to kind of play a bigger role, and he joined the Shabab al-Mu'min at that time in around the end of the 1990s, and made it more political and more militant. And he was very much pushing for the group to take up arms and forget about the civil action that it was trying to do before. So there was a split in the group at that time, and this was the moment when the Houthis were formed as a militant armed group. In 2004, the first clashes between the Houthis and the government of Yemen started, and in 2004, Hussein al-Houthi was killed. And this was a very formative moment for Abdul Malik al-Houthi, who was his younger brother, who took over right after him in 2005, and he was very young at that time. He must have been in his early 20s, so very, very young. And he was focusing more on the military activity of the group. Well, there were some attempts to de-escalate. There was a Qatari mediation at that time, but it didn't really last. And in 2009, 2010, as I said, the Saudis intervened in these wars, and it was devastated Sada. And Sada, one can say, also was underdeveloped and it was neglected. But then again, also many other governorates in Yemen were really marginalized, including Amran, Hodeidah, and other places. So there was a lot of grievances happening in the periphery in Yemen, and the central government was finding itself facing several insurgencies in the country at that time, including Qaeda and Southern Movement and other battles. So it was really preoccupied with a lot of challenges that were facing the regime. In 2011, 2012, there was the uprising. People took to the streets calling for the fall of the regime, and the Houthis were present in these squares as well. And after the handover of power to the transitional president in 2012 or end of 2011, and the beginning of the transitional period in 2012 and the National Dialogue Conference that ensued, the Houthis were also very much present there. I think out of 500 something delegates of this conference, the Houthis were in 35 represented in the conference by 35 delegates. And there was also a group, a working group called the Sada Wars to help reconcile the wars that took place. So things were going in a direction that was more reconciliatory at that time, and trying to get past the violence of 2000 and before 2011. But around the same time when the NDC, the National Dialogue Conference, was taking place and the Houthis were participating, they were also advancing militarily from Sada downwards towards the capital, Sana'a. In July 2014, the Houthis were already at the gates of the capital in Amran. And this tells us a little bit about how they calculate things. They were trying to play all the cards that were available to them. So they will engage in the political process, but they will also continue with their military ambitions, and whatever comes first, they pick it up. And that's exactly what happened. So in July, they were in Amran, and a couple of months after that, they entered the capital Sana'a under a pretense of fighting corruption and resisting the hikes in prices after oil subsidies were lifted. In 2014, at the same time when the Houthis became emboldened, this was really a moment of their powerful moment for them. They also expelled all the students and scholars of Dar Hadith, which is the Salafi Institute that I mentioned earlier, which was established in the 80s in Damaj, and this was also a very important moment. That's basically the timeline before 2014. If we go a little bit, and this kind of helps us understand also how really the Houthis as a movement was very local, very domestic, confined within Sada, and seemed to not be really a big problem for anyone else beyond Sada. So there was a stage where they evolved from that very local group to a group at the more national level, let's say. Or when they took over the capital Sana'a, they became a bigger player, but still confined within Yemen and really underestimated as a militant group at that time. And so maybe so when they took over Sana'a, their main goal was, and of course they tried to advance beyond that, but they were pushed back by the populations southern to that, is that they wanted to consolidate power. They took over all the public institutions, and they also established their own governance system in parallel to these public institutions. They quickly instrumentalized their taxation system because they needed to have access to revenues so that they can fund their war. So they put together a very tight taxation system that was very efficient and never done before in Yemen. And in that way they consolidated power and also became very repressive against the population, and gradually dissent was basically completely shut off. And there became a tension at that time because not everyone accepts the Houthis as a legitimate ruler, and also the way that they govern is not very responsible. They are not responding to people's needs. They, as I said before, they don't show that there is any accountability in terms of governance towards the population that's under their control. And there is also this extractive aspect of their governance. And the economic situation was becoming more difficult for Yemenis, and at that time Yemen was announced by the UN as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. So there was continues to be tension between their what they represent in terms of their ideology and some of their big motifs in their ideology, and also how the public perceives them and deals with them, which is usually a mix of corruption, a sense that they're a corrupt group, and also there's a sense that they are not safe under that group. They cannot speak openly, they cannot run their businesses freely, and there's a lot of coercion and forced disappearances and detentions and things like that happening in a very drastic way. And if we look at the timeline that follows 2014, so in 2015, after the takeover of Sana'a and attempt to expand to the south of Yemen and then being pushed back, the president Hadi, who was the transitional president at that time, who fled after the Houthis entered Sana'a and put the government under house arrest, to Aden and then to Riyadh, and asked for the Saudis to intervene, and there was the Arab coalition led by Saudi Arabia that started in March 2015. and the Houthis were also pushed back from Aden northwards. The alliance with the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh helped them in a very fundamental way because he opened the arms depots for them. So they had access to this very advanced military that he had just received from the US to fight terrorism. And they made very good use of that because they built on it. And when he became useless to them, and when he became a nuisance, and decided after 2 years of allying with them that he wants to flip sides and support Saudi Arabia's efforts, they assassinated him in 2017. And after that, they reigned alone in the areas that they control without any contesting power. So they never really learned or were willing or seemed in any way willing to share power with any other Yemeni group. In 2018, there was an important battle happening in Hodeidah port on the west coast, and the reason I say it is because the Hodeidah port became the main location for the Houthis to target the Red Sea vessels and make this big disruption in navigation and commerce and supply chains, and also attack beyond the Red Sea. So the Hodeidah port was contested in 2018. There was a big battle that was about to happen, and there was also negotiations that took place in Stockholm and an agreement that stopped this battle from taking place for humanitarian reasons, because also the port of Hodeidah is where all the humanitarian, or most of the humanitarian aid enters the country that was already suffering from a humanitarian crisis. So after 2018 and the Stockholm Agreement, the Houthis felt that they were empowered a little bit more. And in 2021, a very important, another battle called the Marib battle that continued for almost a year, where the Houthis lost a lot in terms of human resources and military, and could not take over this governorate. And that governorate was very important for them because it's an oil-rich province. So they were really fighting to the teeth, but the tribes in that area, and also in support with other groups, were resisting very strongly. And at the end of this battle that really they could not get out of victorious, there was a shift in their position, in their negotiating position. Before that, they were really maximalist. They did not want to get into any negotiations with anyone or compromise on their big ambitions. But after the Battle of Marib, they were willing to take a break and go into another course. So in 2022, what they did is that, we have been seeing from 2016 all the way an uptick in their use of drones for cross-border attacks to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And they became better and better in these drones and missiles, more precise, more long range, and they managed to hit UAE and Saudi assets, very critical assets, oil and airports and so on, in both countries. And that created a serious problem for Saudi Arabia as it was trying to implement its 2030 vision. And at that time, the Saudis felt that there's no way to get out of this messy situation after 10 years of military campaign and supporting different groups. So they decided to go into talks with the Houthis, and at that time also a national truce was achieved in 2022, and the president was replaced by a presidential leadership council, and we saw a shift in course in terms of the military action towards more de-escalation and trying to figure out a way to get out of this, and with the minimum damage for the Saudis. The talks between the Saudis and the Houthis have been taking place for several years, but they were under the table. In 2022, they became very public. And this was very important in the sense that the Houthis finally became recognized by a middle regional power like Saudi Arabia. So they didn't need to talk to any of their Yemeni counterparts. They went straight into talks with the Saudis, and this recognition empowered them even more. And the talks were moving forward very positively, according to the parties of these talks, up until October 2023. And they were expected to be signed in November. But what happened was 7 October. And also before 7 October, what happened was September 26, 2023, where after a couple of years of truce and calm and no more big battle to rally everyone around, the population under the Houthi areas became restless and started to demand a decent living. And so there was some protests, and this, I think, shook the Houthis a little bit, because they thought that they had controlled the population completely. So this happened in September. And some people argue that the decision of the Houthis to go into the Red Sea and throw out of the window the important talks that it was having with Saudi Arabia and the agreement that was going to give them basically everything they had asked for in terms of economic support, but also other asks. So they got everything basically they wanted. So if one is thinking in terms of rational political behavior, it seems unreasonable that you would go into these talks for more than a year and get everything you want, and just before you sign, you decide to go on a completely different course. But that's what they did, and one can say maybe they're playing a longer game. It's not about that specific deal that they were about to get, or settlement. So when October happened, October 7th, they very shortly after that they showed their solidarity with Gaza, and they started their operations in the Red Sea in November, which continue until now. So just to give you a sense of what I was talking about, this is the Yemen map. Sada is towards the north, and I don't know if you can see the colors very clearly. This is the zones of control from different groups. So there are several groups. It's not that the Houthis and the government of Yemen are just the only two groups, but there are other groups in the picture. So Sada is in the north. It's bordering Saudi Arabia, and Sana'a is in the middle western part of the country. And the green area is controlled by the Houthis, and then the rest is controlled by the different groups that are nominally under the government of Yemen and supported either by Saudi Arabia or the UAE. So after the second stage, when they became a national actor, and they then decided to play a more regional role, their third stage of evolution manifested. And there were multiple opportunities for the Houthis at the time. First, the setbacks that the groups who are allied with Iran faced, including Hezbollah and Hamas and others, Syria. So the Houthis felt that this is an opportunity for them to show that they can play an important role within the so-called axis of resistance. And I think they surprised everyone within these groups. So their role became much more integrated with this bigger network. I mean, they have been part of it, but they were like the small sibling who was still learning from Hezbollah and from others and training in Iraq and other places. But this was really a moment to kind of graduate and say that they can come up with their own crazy ideas and surprise everyone. So they also used the geography, the Yemeni geography. They didn't try to emulate the other groups by becoming like them, although we see, for example, Abdel Malik al-Houthi trying to speak in a way similar to Hassan Nasrallah, use the same way of kind of taking the video of his speeches. He never really appears to, he never shows to, he's always behind the screen. No one, except very few people, are able to interact with him directly. And his speeches changed after the death of Hassan Nasrallah, where he started to reflect more on regional and Muslim and Arab affairs more broadly. So he's not anymore talking about only Yemen and what's happening in Yemen, but he's talking about what's happening in all sorts of places around the world. And the group also has always had this anti-imperialist discourse part of their literature, but also with this regional role, this discourse became more effective. And we can see this more now with a lot of people really across the world. I mean, whoever I speak to who doesn't know much about Yemen, when they hear that I'm from Yemen, they are impressed by the Houthis, because the Houthis are fighting these big powers and they're responding to Israel when no one else did, and so on. So the Houthis are really playing on this as a very important PR stunt for them. And you can also see it in social media quite a lot, with some Houthi figures becoming popular in social media, and so on. So their popularity in the region increased and grew a lot, although this popularity in Yemen is not the same. And we can talk a little bit about really how can we understand their popularity or their perception of the Houthis in Yemen, and I think it's a lot more nuanced than that, because the Yemenis have lived day in and day out under their control, and they have suffered from economic conditions that they see were imposed by them by the Houthis on the population. They have also seen that the Houthis have besieged some of the biggest cities with populated cities for several years, cutting humanitarian aid and food and medicine from the population, and so on. So the picture in Yemen is a lot more nuanced than how it is around the world regarding the Houthis. And so finally, the last part of the timeline is post 7 October, and here we see that, as I said, in November they started with the Red Sea attacks, and then in 2024 the US with several countries launched what is known as the Poseidon Archer, and they started striking the Houthis in Yemen in different locations. And in May 2024, the Houthis began arresting and detaining dozens of civil society actors, intellectuals, and UN staff, Yemeni UN staff, without any trial, without any process, and for many of them, their families don't know where they are and have not been able to communicate with them. And they named this the kind of purge of espionage networks. And this is something that was alarming to everyone, because the people who they disappeared were people who have already learned how to deal with the system and have managed to cope with it to a large extent. And of course, some of them have not been active in civil life for several years, so they felt that they're not going to be noticed. And this felt to many people who were following like a purge of intellectuals, or basically anyone who seemed to have any connection with the West or with the outside world. and it's still unclear what their intention is with these detentions and how they will use these. And in July, Israel started for the first time, at least in this era, bombing Yemen. And the Houthis in January 2025, just a day or two after Trump took office, were labeled as a foreign terrorist organization. And then the US bombing again started between March and May with a very different approach from previous military operations where they were targeting new places. They were using also very advanced weaponry like B-2 bombers and so on, and there were a lot of rumors at the time that they were trying to decapitate the group in a way similar to what happened to Hezbollah here in Lebanon. But the group still seems to be intact, and it's hard to know the amount of damage, but they're still able to operate and they're still able to strike Israel, and we've seen the recent strikes in the Ben Gurion airport a couple of times. So it doesn't seem that the group has completely, weakened. And just a few days ago, Trump came with a big surprise before his visit to Riyadh in the Gulf, and said that the Houthis asked for all this to stop, and they will no longer hit the vessels in the Red Sea, and so he decided to stop the operations on Yemen. And it's still unclear where things are going to go from here. But there are a couple of things that often come up when we talk about the Houthis and this kind of evolution that happened over not a very short time, but it seemed like for a short time because the biggest transformation happened in the last 10 years. Are things like their connection to Iran, to what extent are they being influenced by Iran, or are they autonomous or not, and where do they fit within this so-called axis of resistance, and what is really their plan in Yemen and their plan beyond Yemen. And here I can't say that I have very exact answers, but it seems to some extent that the proxy label of the Houthis is not very accurate, but it's also not completely wrong. So it seems like it's a mix of different things. The Houthis have a lot of autonomy in domestic affairs, and they are allowed to kind of flourish and grow, and are supported by Iran in many ways in that way. But once their role becomes connected to the other groups and to the national interests of Iran, then the level of autonomy maybe is a little bit compromised. And that's something that comes with their bigger responsibility, but it also comes with a moment where you're seeing a shift towards de-escalation, with Iran and the US going to these talks, and the Gulf states trying to avoid any big regional war and trying to tone things down a little bit, and figure out the situation in Gaza and try to normalize the situation in Syria and so on. So the moment now is not really appropriate for the adventures of the Houthis, even in the view of Iran. In terms of how they are perceived in Yemen, again, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to do nationwide surveys in Yemen. We did a small survey that covered some parts within Houthi-controlled areas and parts that are not controlled by them. 3 months after the Red Sea operation started, just to get a sense of how people are responding to the events. And there was a sense clearly of pride with many people that, suddenly Yemenis felt that they have lost some of their dignity during the years of war are now celebrated in the world, and that they're also taking a very, visible role with regard to the Palestinian cause and so on. So this was a cause of pride. However, reading through a little bit the answers, you can see that this pride is also connected to something that is seen as more symbolic than really substantial. So the faith in that the Houthis really have this important role was still not there. It was more that it was taking a symbolic role in the region more than anything else. And also there was a sense that this was a performance, trying to distract its own the population under their control from other things, and trying to deal with a complicated situation domestically while responding to their bigger regional ambitions. And I mean, some of the important things that also happened over the past years, that the Houthis were able to use their military in real life scenarios. They were able to also showcase what they have, and we've seen also that other countries are not interested, including some of the regional states, are not so interested in stabilizing Yemen or supporting Yemen on the long term, but really trying to fold the page and move on, because Yemen became a big headache for them. And this is part of the problem, because it's not going to lead to any conflict resolution, but it will derail a little bit any process that was moving in that direction. So thank you very much for listening. I spoke too much, but I'm happy to discuss and get your input.
Thank you, Yasmeen. So I think this was very...